Hello and welcome to the Sustainable Materials Management webinar series, a joint effort between the National Recycling Coalition and the Pennsylvania Recycling Market Center. My name is Wayne Bowen. I'm the program manager for the Recycling Market Center and will serve as your moderator today. Today's webinar topic is fire incidents and prevention strategies for recycling facilities. Our presenter today is Ryan Fogelman, who I will introduce in a moment. We are going to have a Q&A session at the end of the presentation, so if you have a question or comment, you can use the Q&A feature located on your control panel on your screen. And please note that an edited version of this webinar will be made available for viewing via YouTube links on both the National Recycling Coalition and Pennsylvania Recycling Market Center websites. And also please note that the Pennsylvania Recycling Market Center, its affiliates and funders, and the National Recycling Coalition assume no liability resulting from the use of any information provided during this webinar. This webinar is only provided as an informational tool, and no discrimination is attendant and no endorsement by these organizations is implied. And now I'd like to introduce our presenter. Ryan Fogelman is Vice President of Strategic Partnerships for Fire Rover. Ryan is focused on bringing innovative safety solutions to market, and two of his solutions have won the Distinguished Edison Innovation Award for Industry Safety and Consumer Products. He's been compiling and publishing the reported waste and recycling facility fire in the US, Canada since February of 2016, and the Waste and Recycling Facility Fire Annual Report. And he also speaks regularly on the topic of the scope of fire problems facing the waste and recycling industries, detection solutions, proper fire planning, and early stage fire risk mitigation. Ryan holds a BA degree in General Business Administration from Michigan State and has a pre-law and MBA and JD degrees from Case Western. And now I'm going to turn the program over to Ryan.
Okay, so just to start, a couple things. One, I'm going to make sure that I keep the presentation slides on. I'm going to have it on this version so that I can pause and stop and kind of go through videos, right? So I'm going to keep it out of presentation mode. The other thing is that, I know Wayne had said if you have questions, please feel free to ask them at the end. I would say, during the presentation, if you have any questions, especially, I kind of break it up into two parts. One is really talking about the scope of the fires that we're dealing with in waste and recycling as an industry. And then, the others is really the prevention. We get into the combinational approach to fighting fires, and then into early thermal detection and our Fire Rover system. And then really the beauty of the videos is that we get to see a firsthand look at all the different hazards that we see, and then also how to properly eliminate them. So, as Wayne was saying, I have been in the industry since 2015. I started working with Fire Rover. I was like the first part-time employee, and we had created something that we thought was pretty innovative. And my partners had invited me up, and they said, hey, we have this really cool innovation, and this really cool innovation, which I like to work with innovative products, in different business models. And the original founder of it, his name's Brad Gladstone. He's since passed away, but basically he's like, Fogelman, come up here. I want to show you this innovation. And he had built the first Fire Rover system that didn't look like a box. It didn't look like anything. It's almost, if you think through what the Apple computer, the first one looked like, that was in a wood box. So at the end of the day, I came up, looked at it, and it really, it was game changing. And so, I started working with the company and went to my first show, and basically, everybody was having fires in waste and recycling, right? It was one of those things that, it was almost a secret, right? Nobody was talking about it, and, it was one of those that it was all over the news, but so I just assumed that I went to my first show that everyone would be discussing, hey, we have fires, how do we find a solution for this? And I got to the shows, and it was almost like when I brought up fire, everyone was like, they're like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, the fire problem that we have in the industry. And I literally got like deadpan face, like, yeah, we don't have fires. And I don't think it was it was a deliberate, no, we think we have fires, we don't. I think, a lot of the things that we see in waste and recycling, a lot of these fires were being taken care of by the front lines. And I don't think the executives really understood truly the amount of risk that we were having, right? And then also at that time, we also had another risk that was kind of, I used to call it the wave of lithium ion batteries, right? But basically it was starting, right? Where there had been all these lithium ion batteries that had started to get in our system, and now 6 years later, I mean, it's become, a bit of a, its own animal, right? But with that being said, so I remember talking to one of our biggest customers now. His name's Brent Shows. I'm sure he'd be okay if I shared. He's with Advanced Disposal. And I showed him our solution, right? Not understanding, how it really worked. I knew how the solution worked. I didn't really understand how it would work in a waste and recycling. I mean, I had never even walked into a MRF or a tip floor, and now I've walked in probably over 1,000 in the last 5 years. But so Brent said to me, I'm like, so what do you think of our system? And he said, it's great. Why do I need it? And I'm like, because you have fires. And he's like, do I? And I'm like, well, don't you? And he's like, well, do my competitors? And, fast forward, and, at the end of the day, I left, and I have a law degree, I have an MBA, I've done research, I started talking to every executive. I started calling like Dave Biederman from Swana. I was calling all the different, associations and ISRI and NWRA that we were part of, and like no one had any data. Right. So really what I did at that point in time was I started to basically put together my own data. This was in February of 2016, and I had started probably in September, October of 15. And so what we ended up doing was I started looking at reported fires. So what you're going to see when you see the data that I share, typically it's the reported fires that have been reported by a media outlet. So again, there's a few things that are important here, right? One, this is not reported by the industry. And I'll get into it a little bit. Right now, we're actually EREF, which is the Environmental Research and Education Foundation. We're helping sponsor the data collection from MRFs, scrap metal, and transfer stations. And this is really trying the first formal documentation of industry numbers for the fire industry. And again, we're almost in 2021 at this point. So, there really hasn't been a ton of great data out there. Now, in the beginning, a lot of the executives, and a lot of my customers, frankly, were saying, why are you telling everybody about these fires, right? And so I'll get into it as well. But, the insurance industry has seen claims come in, and the claims really got bad in 2018, and I'll show some of that data. But it's one of the things that I've really become passionate about, where I'm spending probably half my time at this point trying to incentivize or work with insurance companies to get the risk mitigation back into, or to get the proper insurance back into our industry. Because I don't know how much everybody on here understands insurance, and I'm sure it's different levels, but really at the end of the day, I'm of this economic belief that if there's higher risk, you just you charge more, and it's more risk, you charge more and everything's fine. But there's two problems with that issue, right? One is that if you charge more, then of course you can't afford to pay that. So this is going to come right out of the transfer stations and MRFs. And out of the scrap metal facilities, out of their P&L. But what you end up getting are you get the insurance companies that aren't the right partners, right? You don't get the really good insurers, the Swiss Re's, the Zurichs, the AIGs of the world, who can who want to come in when there's a proper risk balance. So what you end up finding is that we end up losing out on that, and that can actually really hurt an industry. So I'm spending a lot of time, and I think, as an industry, we're doing better, and I'll get into this a little bit more in detail from a fire planning perspective. 5 years later, I mean, right now, I'm extremely proud of our industry, right? We've done a lot of different things. I mean, for anyone here who is an operator, I'm sure compared to 15, you're doing a lot of different things from a prevention perspective around traditional hazards and others. So, to get into that, I will, so this is basically the data since 2016 of every reported fire. Reported fire, again, is in the media, so most of the time these aren't the small fires that happen on a tip floor, right? I mean, a lot of times you're going to see a fire that occurs on a tip floor, a loader operator goes in, he grabs it, he throws it out, or he stomps it out, whether that's the right way or wrong way, and I'll get into that a little bit later, but really, this doesn't include all the fires that have been taken care of, right? This is the ones that, the neighbors call the police or the fire department. This is the one that the neighbors call the news, or, there's smoke and there's, other things that are causing environmental factors, right? So, the numbers have gone up and down over the past few years. 2018 was a big year for us. Fortunately, they have been going down. So really, we've seen about 322. This is also waste recycling, paper recycling, plastic recycling, metal recycling, electronics, and also organics. And I'll show a little bit of those details as we go. The interesting thing, that I've really seen is this number, and we'll get into what the pandemic effect has been. And the pandemic started right around here, and we have seen the fires start increasing, but believe it or not, in July the numbers were down. Now in June, it's interesting when you look at the numbers of 18 was the worst year with 42 incidences, and I mean, we're close behind at 34 this year, but the one thing I will say is that, with Fire Rover, I started publishing last month I do an editorial in Waste 360, and I started publishing last month the actual fire saves that we've had as Fire Rover. I've been waiting for this. I mean, now we have over 150 locations. So really, I presented this about 3 years ago. My goal is to help the industry start to see a decrease in fires from a lot of different perspectives, but education, the technology and fire prevention planning. So, what's interesting is that, like, in July of this year, I mean, the number literally dropped, right? And in August, it looks like it's dropping as well. So, trying to understand, again, as the pandemic started, we had an increase with a number of different factors that I'll explain, but really now we're starting to see a decrease. And again, it could be an aberration, it could not be, but I do believe as an industry, in June, we saved 17 more fires. So, as I see our numbers higher, in July, we saved 10. So, that could be the difference between, the 27 and the 37, which would have put us above. So I do believe that the things that we are doing are actually going to start starting to make a dent into the fires that we see. So this is last year. Every year I do an annual report, and so I'll total up all the numbers. I mean, these are the different types of fires. Now, again, we typically see a summertime spike. We typically see a fourth quarter spike that rolls into January. Just based on the number of retail. But the one thing I will say is that as waste evolves, right, from brick and mortar in fourth quarter to all cardboard from Amazon, and obviously as that has been exacerbated during the last 4 months of the pandemic and the stay-at-home orders, as we're seeing all these things, there's just effects that we need to keep watching. So, this, I break it down in a number of factors, and, so if anyone wants a copy of that report, please let me know. At this point, it's a bit dated, right? Because, I mean, I published it in February, and I'll be doing another one next year, but, there's a lot of good data in there, especially if you're looking for by state. And then I also do it by materials, and I'll get into this in a different slide, but I mean, these are the different materials that I break down recycling into. So when I was talking about 18, I think one of the things that, the insurance companies, I'll tell you, they don't read the media, right? I'm not saying that they never read the media, but their data is based on claims data. So at the end of the day, like, I could go out there and say that there's 1 million fires every day in every location, and, everybody in the entire world is having fires, right? I mean, you could have front page news and say that. Insurance companies aren't going to be looking at that, right? What they're looking for is claims data, and it's all about their actuarial and like the actual claims versus the others. So again, this was Insurance Office of America. I'll get into these were privately reported claims, but really this was my data versus their data. And so once I saw that in 18, I always tried to benchmark my number. Was it a good number? Was it a bad number? Am I off the mark? This really gave me a pretty good feeling, right? That this was the actual private data from claims, and then my data's right there. Again, with Environmental Research and Education Foundation, if you haven't, and I'll do a shameless plug for them, if you haven't submitted to the survey yet, they need as many MRFs, transfer stations, and scrap metal yards to be part of this. It's 100% confidential, and they're going to ask you a bunch of different questions, and it's really self-reporting. So again, unless you internally have data, I think everybody who would respond would be really helpful. So if you need that, I'm happy to send you the link to that as well. And if Anne Germain's on the call, I think she could definitely help. So once we start to look at what the difference was when I started looking at the pandemic effect, I started in March, and I'm like, okay, we're now seeing an evolution, right? And again, it was a quick evolution at that time, but it's really stayed consistent now for the past 5 months in most jurisdictions, right? With stay at home and others. I'm in Ohio, and I think, we had a pretty aggressive governor, and again, the stay-at-home orders came in quick, but at the same time, he was one of the first to let everyone out. But a lot of people are still working from home. A lot of people still haven't gone to the offices yet, and we're sitting in August. So what I started seeing was I started looking at the data and trying to say, okay, waste and paper and plastic, I see those as one footprint, and I can explain that a little bit. Metal, C&D, and electronics. The reason I break those two out into their own section is that a lot of times when I'm reading through these articles, a waste paper fire might happen at the same place that there's plastic fire, or a lot of times it's at a MRF, and it's a different type of material. So there are specific plastic recyclers that do have fires, and those come in as plastic, but typically if it's a transfer station and they had a plastic fire, it's going to fall into this bucket. That's why I put them together. Metal, C&D, and electronics, I think, is a little different. So I think with waste paper and plastic, we can educate and we can make sure that we pre-sort, and there's things that we can do to ensure that we have less fires in this. I think with metal, C&D, which is construction and demolition, and electronics, it's a little different, right? They can't control what comes in. When an Apple iPhone comes in that has a battery that is, it's not easily removable. The electronic recycler has to deal with that no matter what, right? It's not about an accidental placement into a recycling bin or into a paper bin by either a business or by an individual. So, C&D is very similar, right? When you have a building that's been demolished, in the best case scenario, you've taken out all the copper and metal, and you've done everything that you can to get out all the computers and everything else. But, a lot of the times we have fires or we have hurricanes, like the fires in California. When you get all that material, it's just thrown in with everything that's there. So if you think of an office building, it had computers and phones and iPods and earbuds and all the other things that were inside there on top of, their storage and other things that would be in there. So again, with the difference between waste paper and plastic is, I believe that this is an avoidable risk. With metal, C&D, and electronics, it's less avoidable. They're dealing with it no matter what. So when we started looking at, when I started, I've been doing this analysis for the past 4 months, and what we're seeing are the past 5 months. And basically what I'm seeing is that this has been consistent. So the actual number of waste, the percent of waste paper and plastics has been higher for the past 5 months as they were in 16, 17, 18, or 16, 17, 18, and 19 as an average. So, we are seeing a bump, right? So what's really causing that? And I think, again, in March, we had lower fire incidences. I think a lot of people just froze in place, right? Nobody knew what they could do, and we didn't really understand once it kind of hit us that that you know, we didn't know if we should close down or open up, or, you know, in a lot of places just by default closed. I think what we did see was, you know, we've seen a spring cleaning, right? Everybody was at home. People were not on spring break, right? People were really in their houses, and they started cleaning, and I call it the 100-year spring cleaning, because really at the end of the day, you know, you cleaned your attic, your basement, your garage, you did all that, right? And I think one of the things that we look at is that, you know, a lot of us do not know that there's lithium-ion batteries in things we throw away, right? A lot of us don't understand that, you know, if, you know, I'm going to take pool chemicals. I think we kind of all know that, right? Like if you take gasoline and you stick it in your waste, it's probably not a good thing, right? It's an accelerant, and I can show you what happens when that happens. But, you know, when you take an aerosol can that might, you know, have some flammable materials, we don't really understand that we're doing it. So, you know, some people call it effort recycling, which is, you know, hey, if I take this gasoline tank and I know that there's still residual in it, I'll stick it inside my bin, and guess what? It magically disappears. But with that being said, you know, someone's dealing with that on the back end, and it's typically a Waste Management or a Rumpke or, you know, a Republic that's dealing with the after effects of this stuff that they have to pre-sort and take out. You know, we've had these hazards for years and years, right? Fireworks and barbecues and all the other things. You know, but again, I think, you know, it's one of those that with lithium added, I mean, if you think about just a greeting card, right? A greeting card has a battery in it. Who would think, you know, like my grandma's going to look at a greeting card that has singing and whatever in it. She's not going to think that there's something hazardous to throw away in a paper greeting card that happens to, you know, happens to have a lithium-ion battery inside of it. The other thing is, again, we're hard on our trash, right? So, you know, when you take a lithium-ion battery, you can have this, you know, they basically say that 1 in a million lithium-ion batteries will actually have an issue if it's not treated like ineffectively, right? So if it's not treated with harsh, any sort of environmental or all the different things, right? Like if you accidentally run it over, or, you know, you do something to it. But unfortunately, you know, in waste and recycling, we are not like gentle on our trash, right? I mean, we bring it in, we throw it in, you know, we're doing everything we can to get this through and processed as quickly as possible and efficiently as possible. And, you know, unfortunately, that kind of really hurts what we're doing, and it causes a lot of the major issues. So again, I think another thing that we had an issue with was school closures. Locker cleanouts didn't happen till later, so I know we saw a spike in June, and I think, you know, I know with my kids and a lot of others, they were having those issues. And, you know, I do believe that lack of spring break getaways was a big part of all this. So again, as we had more trash, I think the biggest thing is that, you know, instead of the restaurants or instead of the commercial and the office spaces making trash, which again, I think everybody knows, right, that when from a paper perspective, in an office space, you're typically better at taking, you know, different types. So, you know, your OCC or whatever your specific tactic, right, or your specific channel. So, you know, if you're running Xerox copies, you're going to get a lot of white paper that goes into a recycling bin. It's not going to have a ton of different things like we do at our houses. So, you know, the other thing is I think a lot of drop-off points were closed. So, you know, if you don't know where to get rid of something and you're afraid to leave your house, and, you know, a lot of the drop-off locations are closed, I mean, you don't want to sit on it because of a risk. So again, you know, it goes into your magical, you know, your magical waste and recycling. So again, I think if we look at this and we say, okay, we're in the U.S. and Canada, we have issues. I think the question becomes now, you know, how's the rest of the world handling all this? And, you know, my answer is they're having the exact same problems, right? I mean, if you look at the Chief Fire Officers Association reported from the Environmental Agency in the UK, I mean, this is number of fires for the past, you know, since 2001 to 2014, and I think I got 2015. I got numbers. I haven't gotten anything since because for some reason I haven't been able to find it from a research perspective, but. You know, so I think the idea is really this is the number of fires that they're having. And again, the difference between the UK and the United States is that we don't require any sort of reporting if there's an incident. Now, I'm not saying that we should do that, but if we really want to understand what the real issue is, it should be reported at least internally. But in the UK, they do require it. So they are getting, some of these could be smaller. But, when we look at it from 360 million people in Canada and the US, and we look at, the 60 million people in the UK, the number that I'm coming at is that I think we're dealing with about 1,800 fires per year in waste and recycling. Again, when I was talking about 18, this was the Japan Containers and Packaging Recycling Association, and they saw a number of fires. Their big issue, right, is this lithium ion battery. And again, I know everybody's hearing about this. I mean, lithium ion battery it's a 2-hour presentation in itself, and I do have a bunch of different experts, and I have a cursory knowledge. So some people will say that I know enough. So if you have specific questions, we can walk through that. But really, from my perspective, I mean, this jump is the same jump that we're going to see when I show you the insurance data from a claims perspective. So again, this isn't about us, saying, hey, there's fires out there, right? Like, I mean, us reporting the fires is only trying to figure out what the problem is that we need to solve. But at the end of the day, it is a problem that needs to be solved. So the California Products Stewardess Council actually did a survey in 18 of 26. So this was like the first survey that I saw, and I was pretty happy to see this. But really what it did was it basically said that in 18 or prior to that, probably 17 and 16, 56% of the reported fires were due to batteries. Now again, I think here's the big problem. When you have a fire, when you have a big fire, and a forensic fire investigator comes to a scene, how do they know what caused the fire, right? So if you're in an airplane hangar and there's jet fuel that gets out of the airplane, it's real easy to say, okay, it was a jet fuel fire. There was a leak, and here's what happened. And even in all the chart up and everything that you see on scene, you can actually tell, right? When you're dealing with a waste and recycling facility, or a MRF that has like piles and piles and piles of material, and you're trying to figure out what actually caused the fire, the answer, it always will get blamed on a battery, right? I mean, unless there's a clear accelerant or something that caused it. So again, I think it's one of those things that, I don't know how much I trust. I do believe that the lithium ion battery is getting a real bad rap right now, and I've seen them, and I'll show you guys videos of actually of them causing issues. So I'm not saying they aren't, but the question is, how do I know that if it was due to, of course, propane, right? I mean, you could see that, but I think this number was definitely a survey, and it's a lot of people's opinions, and I think it was early to say what it said. But nonetheless, 40% of waste and recycling facilities have experienced an incident during 2019. That number still holds true for 2020. So really, the 7% of the fires that are documented, so these numbers are actually my numbers, that this is the reported data. We use EREFs, or I use EREFs, municipal solid waste, the number of MRFs and the number of transfer stations, which they're supposed to be updating that, but these numbers are literally the last numbers we have are from 2013 about how many waste to energy and organics and recycling facilities there are. So my number does not include compost, so I pulled that out. But again, here's a gut check. 86% of the respondents said that they had a fire in the facility in the last 2 years. So then I go to, if you look in Canada, and again, I think, in Europe, they did a survey, the material recycling world, and one of the big things that I think is really important here is the amount of disruption, how long it takes. So one of the things that I've made sure has been part of the survey is, you can't judge a fire by a 1 alarm to a 7 alarm, right? Because again, all the alarm means is the number of fire departments that were called on scene to fight a fire. And again, in New York, a fire department is a real different. You could have a 2-alarm fire in New York that could be a 7-alarm fire in a rural area. But it really is, how long were you down, right? That's really how hard of a fire it was. Because you might have a small fire that causes a ton of damage, and all of us from a business continuity perspective. Now, again, of course, most importantly, and I've had a lot of executives, not not executives per se, like high-level associations and others, when I've asked why doesn't fire get more of a stage, right? I mean, you know, it's almost been a struggle over the past 6 years, really getting people to see that, you know, that the problem is what it is. And I think the answer always comes down to, you know, in waste and recycling, I mean, you're dealing, or in scrap metal, you're dealing with deaths, right? Like, unfortunately, you're dealing with, you know, slow down and get around campaign and others, which again are way more important than fires, right? Because the only reason fires become important, yes, you could lose your business, so that's not as important as a life. So I 100% agree with that. But with that being said, like, that's where a lot of you know, a lot of the priority is always going to go towards the problems that could cause deaths. I mean, waste and recycling is one of the most dangerous occupations in the world, right? So I think it's one of those things that, you know, that kind of hit me the first couple times. I'm like, why not? But again, I mean, we do see injuries. I mean, last year we had over 50 injuries, and I'll show that, but a lot of times it's to the firefighters. So there are things we can do from a fire prevention perspective that can actually solve some of these problems and hopefully, you know, lead to less injuries. There have been deaths, but we're talking about 2 a year, and typically, you know, 2 to 3 a year, and it's you know, it's not from direct always. A lot of times it's indirect. So again, if you look at the length of disruption due to fires, minimal or no disruption, you know, but 75% of these fires that have happened, you know, the ones again that are reported are they're either closed for a day up till 6 months or more, right? So again, like, you know, if you look at the 322 reported fires, how many of those are complete burn downs? I mean, you know, I'd say we probably have 2 to 3 complete burn downs a month. You know, some people will say more, some people will say less, but the point is that, you know, this is really a big concern. So we get into, this is kind of where I break everything out, right? I mean, so if you look at the number of fires, you know, in the waste, plastics, recycling, I actually break it out by all the different areas, and then I break it out to an average as well. And, you know, the waste recycling numbers are definitely going up, right? We're having more and more fires each year. The metals, it's really crazy. In 18, we had a huge spike in metal fires, scrap metal fires, and actually in 19 it went down. So, I mean, it's just, again, you never know. I mean, you know, what really could have caused, you know, 40 more fires in a year? I mean, you know, we had a crazy, this was all part of 18. And again, I do think lithium ion batteries do have an issue. You know, when you're dealing with the type of materials, you know, when you have a car that actually goes through a shredder, you know, you can do your best to take out everything that's flammable, but, you know, there's always a Juul cigarette and other things that are thrown in there. And as we get more and more electronic components, you know, scrap metal operators have had to change what they do and the way they process material. Again, organics is staying pretty close, chemicals and rubber, you can see. Now rubber, I mean, I break it out. I mean, rubber fires can be really massively nasty, right? So I think that's one of the things that, you know, they kind of have their own, and this isn't tire fires per se. This is rubber fires that are happening in a processing facility. So again, you know, I have a ton of different data. This is stuff that you guys can look at. This was last year versus, so if you want to see state, I'm not going to get into all these directly, but, you know, prior 3-year averages, is your state doing well? How much tonnage are you processing by state? So again, you know, I know there's a lot of people who want to see those. And really, I think at the end of the day, what causes our increase in fires? I mean, hot and dry environments, definitely. We know there's a summertime spike. Again, you know, China recycling restrictions, I almost want to take that off because it's been so long. But over the past 5 years, that's been something that we've hit. Lithium ion battery, obviously. I think general awareness. I do think that we're more apt to see these, and, you know, we're not as apt to, you know, just, hey, you know, the scrap metal facility, you know, had a fire and, you know, we just forgot about it because that's normal, right? As we clean up all the other industries, or at least, you know, do our best to clean up pollution and other things, when we see a fire, it's more noticeable now than it ever was. Hot works, I mean, I can't emphasize this enough. I can't emphasize how many fires I have seen from hot works. You know, one of my clients that, one of my Canadian clients, someone was doing hot works and an ember actually got above the sprinkler system, sat up in the roof, and when everyone left 4 in the morning, I mean, they had it on camera, it literally started burning the entire roof above the sprinkler system. So again, you know, not to take away from sprinkler systems, but, you know, I mean, these embers can get anywhere and they have a mind of their own. And then arson, you know, I mean, it is what it is. I think when fiber prices was low, I think that was a big deal. So I will stop now. Is there any questions that, you know, from a consequent, like from a, you know, a fire, scope of fire? Is there any questions, comments?
There's nothing so far, Brian.
Okay, cool. Well, let's get into the fun part, right? You know, when I say fun, we get to watch saves. So, you know, again, I got into this a little bit from an injury, so I do have all the breakout, but like, you know, in 19, we saw a lot more injuries. And again, most of them are to firefighters. So, you know, this is something that when we change the way that they approach these fires, we can have a great effect on these numbers. Again, I was saying from a death perspective, you're looking at 2 injuries reported and others. So I actually have done a couple articles on this specifically, but let's jump into insurance, right? So again, I think we're trying to change the narrative on this. And I know that, like, personally, I am 100% vested in changing the narrative on this. And, you know, I think we're finally at a point where I'm able to really help our clients get better insurance options. So, you know, this was from 16. I mean, we just saw insurers leave the industry, and this is what I was talking about. If you look at the losses and the known losses for the years, shredder operations in 18 had a big spike. Again, remember the Japanese increase in 18. And then also lithium-ion batteries. So a lot of times we see lithium-ion batteries in shredders. I mean, that to me is you know, again, it's definitely a similar, depending on how they would classify their claims. You know, and again, hotspot and equipment and, you know, all these different things, hot loads. I mean, these numbers have got to have gone up as well in time, but I would assume a lot of these hot loads are getting blamed on lithium-ion batteries. Again, so really, I think, you know, the losses, as the losses mount up, the insurance companies are saying, hey, you know, I mean, this is not making sense from a financial data. So, you know, we've seen numbers just really go up, and, you know, again, I do think there's a couple, like if you're looking at property insurance and you're really trying to get property insurance, if you don't have a fleet protection on top of that, you're having a really tough time. And, you know, so what our industry needs are captive programs. Again, this is my opinion. What our industry needs are captive programs where insurers come in and understand that the individual captives can actually really, you know, they can adhere to a specific safety fire plan, and not just for fire, but all the different safety. So there are options out there, and I know I'm working with a large insurance company or a large brokerage firm trying to get, you know, them to basically open up another captive. Because again, I mean, we need healthy insurance for us to have a healthy industry. So really, at the end of the day, let's get into, you know, we all know now there's an inherent risk of fire in our daily and recycling operations. Like for years and years and years, this was what I was pushing, because it was, hey guys, like we have like an inherent risk of fire. The question is now, what can we do? What can we do to save this problem, right? And honestly, the most important thing you can do is prepare and plan, right? So myself and Jim Emerson is he used to be with FM Global. He's been around forever, but he's one of the insurance auditors for Star Technical Risk, which is it's owned by the former owner of AIG. And what we really created was the combinational approach to firefighting for waste and recycling. And the idea is, again, it's the combinational approach. We're using the best pieces, people, equipment, communications, and training to provide your operation with the best chance of catching and eliminating a fire incident before it becomes a major fire incident and shuts down your business. I know that's a lot. You know, every word in there is there for a reason. And I think really at the end of the day, we know some things that are fact, right? One, the earlier you catch a fire, the easier it is to put out, right? I mean, everybody says it a different way. fires grow in cost and size every half minute or every minute. I mean, there's a million different things, but really at the end of the day, break it down to brass tacks, right? Number one, you need to make sure that that your fire department is on board and understands your business. Okay, that's one. Two, you got to make sure that your people understand and have a program in place and understand what they're fighting or what they're doing. So a lot of companies out there didn't want to train their people because they felt that they were at risk of getting an OSHA issue or an insurance issue for having a fire brigade. But unfortunately, now you're putting your employees who, whether you know it or not, are on the front lines putting these fires out, right? Again, it's not the reported fires, it's the non-reported fires. These guys might be putting out 1 or 2 fires a week themselves, but you just don't know about it. So unfortunately, it's like you got to make sure that they're trained properly, and there's ways to train them without training them on a fire brigade. And I can show some examples of that. And again, making sure that you have, one of the things that's important is that, like, good operators still have fires. And I have one client that's one of my biggest clients, but they always said that they would never have a fire because they were ex-military and they just run by the book from the fire planning perspective. And really, they ended up having 2 of the biggest fires in the US. So really, the idea, again, is that good operators are going to have fires. Bad operators are going to have more fires. Good operators are still at risk of fires. So, does that mean that you need to do everything you can to fire prevention, evacuation, and emergency response? And really, when you're starting to fight a fire, you really have a choice, right? You can either, like for your employees, you can either evacuate, you can fight the fire, which is a fire brigade. You can, prepare for the fire professionals to arrive, which this is a big thing that, if you're able to have a fire hose on site and not be considered a fire brigade, right? What you're doing, though, when you see a fire is you're hooking it up and you're getting it ready. So when the fire department comes and they look at your site, if it's the first time they've ever seen that facility, they're probably not going to fight it. I mean, that's just blatant, the blatant truth, right? They're not going to walk into a location where they could danger their guys or hurt their guys unless they feel that there's some sort of they want to take a calculated risk to ensure that they're not walking into, a death trap. So, when you have piles and piles of materials and all the different pieces, if your building fills with smoke in 45 minutes or 45 seconds and no one can see anything, chances are the fire department's going to come. They're going to put a 75-foot containment hose. They're going to put a 50-foot containment hose, and they're going to let the building burn down. So again, everything you can do to say, hey, fire department, you got here. Now you have to evaluate the scene, and then you have to roll out your materials. So if you have a CAF system for them to start shooting, or you've rolled out, their hoses, and you've trained for them to be there, and they've been on site before, and they know where to get in and where all the equipment is located, there's a better chance that they are going to fight the fire. So really, that's the idea is, again, when you're planning, do everything you can with the fire department to ensure that they actually are able to get there and have the proper equipment, and you can provide that equipment. Now, I'm not going to get into all the different, the combinational approach this was published in International Fire Journal and a couple others, so I'm happy to share this as well. Just send me an email. I don't want to walk through every single step, but a lot of these, again, a lot of it comes down to ensuring that the fire department is ready, and then also, it's make sure that you have a good operation. One of the most important things that I would say is that you need to pre-wet. I can't even tell you how many times I've seen where so what typically happens, and I'm sure everyone on the call has heard of this or seen this, when there's a fire, you have a loader operator that grabs the material and pulls it. Now again, if you think that the fire is like a lithium ion battery or a Mac computer that's on fire, you grab it, you pull it out, you bring it outside, and then you try to put the fire out. That's fine. But if you're dealing with a deep-seated fire, then if you open up and you start pulling out material and you can't grab the entire thing, you're actually adding fuel to the fire. You're adding oxygen to it. So the proper step is to actually pre-wet it, and then you pull away a layer. Pre-wet the second layer. pull away a layer, pre-wet the third layer, pull away a layer. So, there's things that you can do when they're fighting the fires. And again, when you start preparing loader operators to fire protection tactics, it becomes a gray area. But a lot of times we work with our clients on scene where we're putting the fires out, we're pre-wetting it, and we're just having them pull away the material that's not dangerous anymore. So really at the end of the day, like, our goal is not to not have a fire, right? We do know there's fires. The question is, I don't want to have a major fire incident, right? If I can catch the fire anytime, and we talk a lot about the UK. The UK has a WISH standard that was put in place that basically, if a waste and recycling facility has a fire in Europe, they decided that if you have the fire out in 4 hours, that's considered a successful outcome. So think about this, right? You have a fire, you put it out, you fight it for 4 hours, and then it goes away. It's considered successful. So for us internally, I mean, again, the U.S. doesn't really have a standard for it, but like, I look at it, if I don't have a fire out before the fire department arrives on scene, we failed. Now, again, I mean, I've had the fire department arrive on scene for different types of fires, but our goal is always, I want to have that fire out before the fire department arrives. Now, listen, I failed a lot of times and we've saved buildings. So again, when I say that, I don't say that from a negligence perspective, right? But it's, but I'm also going to guarantee that when a fire department gets on scene, they're willing to start to fight the fire. So what we use is a thermal detection, and we use a top-grade military cameras, and what we're looking for is to try to find fires, number one, as close to that flame stage as possible, which is typically around the 220, 220 plus, or we catch it earlier. And, so if you think that my goal is to fight those 10 minutes of a fire, I also want to find the fire 10 minutes before the fire started. So I give myself 20 minutes. And that's the pre-incipient stage. And that's one of the things that if you look at it from a smoke perspective, which we have thermal cameras, so we're looking from a heat and a heat abnormality from regular operations, and then also from a smoke perspective. I can catch fires before they start. And that's like an auto shredder residue or ASR piles. We catch these all the time, right? We catch a hot spot or an organics or, a lot of different materials will catch it. So when you catch it early, put a fire out that, you catch within the first minute of a flame, you can have it out with, 50 gallons of water and material, shoot for 30, for 30 seconds or 40 seconds, and, the fire's out, right? So I think it's one of those that if you really look at where the opportunity that we have as an industry, one, prevention's important, right? Let's make sure that our piles aren't too high. Let's make sure we clear the floors. Let's make sure that we do all the things that we know will make sense, right? And from a professional response perspective, let's make sure that the fire professionals or the fire brigade, everyone's on site. We know what's going on. It's not chaos. If there's some sort of a disaster or something happens, everybody knows where to meet and how to react. But really, the internal response is where we have the real benefit, and that's really where we built our solution and focus it on, which is detection from an abnormality to fire department arriving on scene. What can we do during those 10 to 15 minutes to ensure that a risk is taken care of? And again, as long as no one's hurt, I want the business. Now we can get away from, okay, no one's hurt, no one's injured. Now I want business continuity, right? Now I can start to worry about making sure that this operation's there, not only for the business, but for the public. I don't know if you guys if any of you are part of jurisdictions where, recycling was turned off. But, as we know, I mean, it's a big amount of material that we definitely don't want to start going 100% to the landfill, which, again, is a completely different thing. So what we use is automated thermal cameras. We use smoke analytics. And then we also have a box. It's a 24 by 8 by 8 container. And again, we have like 4 different solutions, and I'll kind of walk into this. They've kind of evolved over time. But really, our solution is a 24 by 8 by 8 container. Inside is a 1,000-gallon tank. We utilize we're agnostic, so we can just shoot water if we need to. We can shoot any sort of foams. We use a cooling agent. It's environmental friendly. It's fluorine free. And what it does is it works differently. A foam, when you're spraying foam onto a lithium ion battery fire, you're trying to starve it of oxygen. The problem is that lithium ion battery creates the three triangle, or the 3 points of a triangle. So it creates its own oxygen. So unfortunately, you can't starve something of oxygen by covering it. What you need to do is you need to actually soak it. And I'll show you, the type of material that we use. But what it does is, if you think of a water molecule, when it hits really something hot, it goes towards something hot, it actually steams off. So that radiant heat stops it from getting to the actual material to cool it. The F500 that we use, it puts a reverse polarity around it, so it's not considered a droplet of water, and it has a skin around it, and so it's able to put a fire out or cool it like a Pac-Man. So again, we utilize this, but the most important thing is really the agents, right? Our fire rover agents are highly trained agents, and so unlike a deluge system or an automated system, our system will verify there's an issue by a human being, right? We're actually being written in FM. They're putting us under a smart technology. And I know everybody's trying to go, let's get automation. Let's get automation. And listen, I'm all for it. But when you are dealing with what we're dealing with these fires and these locations, it's not all about, hey, see a fire, hit it, call it a day, right? It's see a fire, look at it, verify it. If it's verified, then I call the fire department and all the authorities, plus I can respond, and that's what our agents do. Most of the time, they clear these fires, right? Most of the time, it's a loader operator. It's something that's a false alarm. But when they do see a fire, they can respond and also get the authorities on scene as fast as available. So if you look, we basically have 4 solutions. Right, one is thermal only. So we'll put cameras in, we'll detect it, we see it, we verify it, and then our response is one of 2 things. Right, one, we can call the fire department, or 2, we have these enforcers on scene. So again, one of the things that's like a big pet peeve of mine is that every jurisdiction requires fire extinguishers. Okay. Traditional fire extinguishers were created for one purpose, and honestly, I don't know that anyone could argue this, but a fire extinguisher was created so that you could get out of a building. You're running down a hallway and there's fire, and you need to get through that hallway to a door to get out. You're going to use a fire extinguisher, and you're going to go try to spray your way through, right? It's worst case scenario. Now, yes, is it good for small fires? Sure, all the different things, but a fire extinguisher, you shouldn't be fighting a lithium ion battery standing 6 feet away on top of a fire, shooting it with a fire extinguisher, right? So, we have these units, these have the encapsulator in them. And again, we have some, this is actually for the fire department, but we have some that have a single-handed nozzle. They don't spray as far, but they'll shoot for about 6 to 8 minutes. And those, again, now you can fight the fire from a safe distance. So if you look at it, if we look at our solutions, we have the thermal only. A lot of our customers will actually have hybrid because, the Fire Rover solution, which is the box that you saw, it needs internet, electricity, and then it's we typically cover a space that's about 300 feet by 150 feet. So that's a typical tip floor. Some of the bigger ones need, an additional camera nozzle. But the other thing that we've done, we call it the Fire Rover sprinkler replacement. And here's an example of one. We've done this a number of times, but we actually just got a formal variance. This is a MRF that's in Marquette. And basically the idea was for us to get the variance of the Fire Rover in lieu of the sprinkler system requirements, we had to add 2 things. One, we had a manifold off back so that the fire department can quick connect. So once we shoot for 8 to 12 minutes and we're out, we can continue to shoot with water from the fire department and utilizing the pressure from the fire trucks, so they can connect to any area if we need it. And then the second thing is we have a 4G backup in every single one of our systems now. So once we got those, we were able to get the formal variance. Now again, every jurisdiction is different. I mean, we have a ton of jurisdictions that we've replaced a sprinkler system, but we have not gotten the formal variance because they weren't required in those areas. We just did the first one of these that we did 2 years ago, but it's a lithium ion battery operation for one of the larger automotive OEMs. And so there we have, the entire building. It's a retro, or it's an old school like brick building. It's probably 100 years old. And instead of putting in sprinklers, we actually put in 3 fire rovers, 8 cameras, 6 nozzles. We have the one thing that there's been. Fire departments are not allowed to go into they need to take a defensive approach. Again, every jurisdiction is different on how they operate, but they need to take a defensive approach, or they're recommended to take a defensive approach when you're fighting a lithium ion battery fire, especially when the number of these lithium ion batteries inside this operation. So again, it's one of those things that we'll fight it for 8 to 12 minutes. The fire department gets there, they quick connect. Then we continue to fight it. The firefighters can see it and work with us to do that. But at the end of the day, nobody has to walk in and potentially, deal with a higher hazard like an explosion. The final solution is the fire rover deluge system. This was first originally for waste to energy facilities, but it's really the idea that we're going to utilize the existing infrastructure, the existing fire pump, and we can put our nozzles and cameras and do protection. And again, typically this would be like a dry system, and this would typically replace a deluge system. Or something where the sprinkler system is now hitting. We're now going to be able to target in darkness or in smoke. We're going to be able to target a constant deluge onto waste or onto the affected areas. So this is our material. This is, again, it's fluorine free, so I mean, it's pretty powerful stuff compared to water. It's about 300 times wetter than water. So this is the video from our agents. So this is what our agents will look at. We have a fire rover camera. We have a nozzle camera that's like a scope, and then we have a depth camera that allows us to see materials. And again, we spray it, we control it. It's a pretty surgical spray, and I'll show you a couple things, or a couple scenes a little bit that show how targeted it is. But if you look at it, this can shoot 150 feet. We actually have another one that can shoot about 200, depending on the operation. So this is a large tip floor, and so this is a live incident. So basically, the fire starts. We have 45 seconds. It's filling with smoke, right? This actually started in the drum feed, and then a couple embers came out and started on the tip floor. So we look at it. Again, our agent verifies it, charges our unit that's on site. It's nitrogen powered, and they will literally, again, they're using our thermal camera. So this is a human being with a joystick on their desk, spraying and cooling the fire. And these guys were back to work within less than like half hour. There's no cleanup because it actually evaporates the material. So just to show how surgical it is, and what's nice too is that we also have built-in fire watch, right? There's no resetting of the system. So typically, people will look at our system and they're like, oh, that didn't look too crazy. They expect us to be fighting a 4-alarm fire, and really we don't, right? We have explosions, and I can show you a couple of those, but at the end of the day, we're not fighting. Typically, we're putting these fires out quickly. So this is a hazard material storage facility, and this really shows the targetedness of it. So really, you see the 5th pallet it was a chemical that was mislabeled, and again, typically you'd have a domino effect. Once this goes off, you're going to have one after another. I can give you a better image. So if you see it from the fire or from the thermal camera, I mean, we literally are targeting right at that spot. So it's the minimal amount of material for the minimum amount of downtime. We sprayed this for 20 seconds. We know that there's no heat abnormality, so we know that it's safe. They pull it, so you'll see they'll put it on a forklift. So you have a guy in a bunny suit, who's going to put it on a forklift and take it out and then deal with it, as opposed to, having a complete situation in the storage material. This is another type of solution that we have. This is an in-feed line. So, we're looking at the in-feed line. We shut this down constantly, where we'll basically say, hey, there's some sort of an obstacle inside this, or, something that needs to be pulled out. fences. I mean, you guys would be, I mean, I'm sure you guys know, actually, there's a lot of different material, but this one's a little interesting. We just have a camera, and if that camera sees a fire, it shuts down all the conveyors for the MRF. And this is a pretty large MRF. It does a decent amount of tons per day. It'll shut it down, and then we come back and basically, like what you'll see here, this is actually two people with a fire extinguisher. So this is another reason I don't like fire extinguishers. You know, they basically poke the bear, make it harder for us to do our job. Now you'll see us come in and we'll spray and we'll have this thing out in 20 seconds. So now, again, a lot of people want to see, this is a kind of a bad one, right? So watch this. This is actually something exploded and there was an accelerant in here. And again, a lot of times we say, like, the loader operators are in tough spot. Now, right here, the loader operator should have just left. But what they're going to do is go in and try to pull the material out. And again, you can't blame them. They've been doing this for years. But, you know, if we need to start spraying, and watch, you add oxygen to it. So believe it or not, this facility did not have any damage, and they were online the next day. No damage. Okay, so we start spraying, and what's interesting, again, this is a 10-minute fire. I've two-timed this just to try to get through it. This is on YouTube if you want to look at it. But again, we're seeing this. We're going to continue to spray the specific areas, right? So you can see it actually in here. In the thermal, it's a little bit harder to see because of the heat. And then you're also seeing up here, which you see, it's over the 680. So the fire looks worse than what it is, and it's going to continue to kind of go up and down. So it does. It looks nasty, and this is what you're seeing from the outside. So if you're a fire department, are you going to come in and fight this fire? I mean, you're going to probably not fight it that hard, right? Because you don't know what you're looking at. So us having, you know, examples, we can actually see that this is going up and down. We're hitting the hottest spots. And we'll end up, by the time the fire department gets here, they get on scene right about here. So yeah, you're going to see, you see that? So these guys are now spraying it. So they got on scene after, what's 4 minutes times, or 7 minutes. So they were on scene in about 7 minutes, which is pretty good. You know, and then they're going to start fighting it. But again, you see what they're going into, and it's a safe operation. If you see, like, the numbers now, we're in the 400s, 300s, which, you know, from a fire perspective, 300s is not a bad temperature, especially when you're looking at our direct temperature versus an indirect temperature. So this is more of a normal type of fire that we see. This happened a couple, actually this was last month. But, you know, you'll see a little guy, it's a deep-seated fire, out of nowhere it just starts to get going. And again, a lot of times, like, this is the one you don't want to take I sped this one up too. You don't want to take a loader to this, right? Because it's deep-seated. So we'll start to spray it. We start to spray it at right about here. So again, we spray for about 20 seconds, have it out, and, you know, what's nice is that the other area under it, you know, you're not gonna, as long as you don't add oxygen to it, the area that this product will hit. By the way, it looks like it's not hitting it, but it's depth perception, so it is. I mean, it's putting it out. Sorry, here. So right there, you'll see it finally go. Right there. So, you know, because again, you got to look at it in like 3 different angles. So, I mean, it's a lot harder than it looks, I should say. This is a lithium ion battery. This happens in the middle of the night. You know, a small lithium ion battery goes off. I mean, it could burn itself out. It could burn all the material. You just never know. So at least us, we go in, we spray it. You know, we'll shoot it for about 20 seconds. We use about 2-3% of our tank. And this guy will be out. So This was a pretty big one, I believe. This is a different one. So I guess the question, do you guys have questions? Because I mean, I can go through all these, but I think this is probably a good time to get questions. And did I answer everybody's questions?
Yeah, we don't have any questions yet, Ryan, but if you want to keep going through the slides, and
Awesome.
if you want to, if anybody out there has questions, go ahead and submit them, and we'll have Ryan answer them.
So this started on a tip floor. You're going to see that there's a lot of transfer stations. You know, people say, oh, hey, you know, I only have these issues in MRFs. And I mean, we see probably 70% of our waste and recycling, they're in transfer station. No one's, you know, looking at this guy, turns into a fire. And you see how, like, they're going within 10 feet of it, but of course they're not seeing it because they're inside the loader.
Ryan, do you see a lot of fires in like the storage areas where bales are stored, or is it mainly in the processing areas?
You know, that's a great question. I mean, typically when it's open to oxygen is better. So I think two things. One, in balers, we see a ton of fires, right? But a lot of them are contained. So with a baler, I don't know that I would put a fire rover system in for it. I think using a thermal camera and then using an enforcer is typically what we recommend. But a lot of times, like, not opening up like if there's a fire inside a baler, leave it inside the baler, right? Because again, the last thing you want to do is add oxygen to it. So if you can spray it from outside, you know, from a decent speed away or a decent footage away, that's always a good thing. This one actually, and I find this is really cool. I mean, we put a rubber feedstock pile out. This is a rubber fire, 3,000 degree fire we had out in 4.5 minutes before the fire department arrived on scene. So again, if you're used to, these are rubber shredding, like feedstock pile. So I think to answer your question, you know, from a storage perspective, one of our clients is a paper, you know, they only do paper recycling, and they did a study, you know, where they basically just took like 20 bales from, you know, some of their, from their storage, and they cut open some paper bales, and they saw what looked like cigarette butts in them, you know, where something burned all the way through, but I mean, again, because it didn't have enough oxygen, it didn't make it. So, you know, if you have a lithium ion battery inside these, you're going to see them burn, right? But, you know, at a certain point, they're going to run out of fuel. So as long as it's inside, you're fine. I mean, there's just, we have seen where, you know, if it's on the outside and, you know, it can start, you know, outside of a bale, I mean, it can definitely start. So it's a risk, but I mean, I wouldn't say, compared to the other risks that we're dealing with, I'd say it's much more limited. So as you're going to see this, I mean, we're shooting for 4 minutes, and again, we don't have to blanket. These are individual Pac-Man. The other thing is you're going to see we spray the side of the building, so any collateral assets we've sprayed, like, this can't be burned for 45 minutes. For 48 hours, right? So the idea is really, I mean, it's pretty powerful material. And again, you know, we're doing a lot of different things when we're spraying these, right? A lot of times we're trying to get around it as well, you know, so that even if it does burn, it can't burn. Like, so a lot of times we're not just going directly for the fire, but all we need to do is get little droplets onto the fire. And again, and we still have 40% left of our tank here. You'll see us, we'll work at it. And then, you know, the beauty is that if for some reason this thing was still going, I mean, you know, we have built-in fire watch, so we'd go spray it again. We do a ton of outdoor applications. Actually, this was the same operation, but this was their shredder. So ours is spraying over top. Do you see that? But yeah, the shredder fire, it's pretty bad. This, we do a ton of hazard materials. So, you know, again, it's high risk. I mean, this is the reason I show this video. These are pits, so it's a little different from a solution perspective, and we're only there to ensure that their operations don't go above and go out of a service level, you know, so it doesn't get above a certain temperature when they're processing. So really, there's very little risk of fire after hours when they're not doing it. But Again, what's interesting, is look at the dust that we're dealing with. And, the way that our solution works is that we guarantee that we don't guarantee we put a fire out, we guarantee the equipment works when it's needed. So with that being said, is that, we're out there, we're maintaining it, we're cleaning the lenses, we have a heartbeat with the system. So we know at any point in time if something's broken on it, and, if it is, we have someone out there same day or next day to fix it.
I have a question, Ryan, here. This is a prevention question. My town has a small town recycle center. Should we ask people to take batteries out of their electronic devices before we store them in the Gaylord boxes for pickup?
Well, absolutely. I mean, I think the problem is this, right? Like, if you can, and I'm a big believer in a deposit program, right? I'm a big believer that all of us need to do everything we can to get the batteries out of, out of the electronics that they're in. But unfortunately, what ends up happening is that to do that, you need to have the producers who will make the batteries that they can be taken out, because you don't want a consumer taking out an iPhone. So you don't want to, you as a city don't want to be responsible for removing batteries, right? I mean, unless they're removable. So really what you have to do is you have to have a specific area, and if, depending on code, and a lot of this is getting fought, but, and a lot of it's getting fought state by state, whether or not this material is going to be considered electronic recycling or it's going to be considered hazard material. But like the idea is that, you need to segregate this material. So, and you don't want to be removing batteries unless it's something like, if you have a greeting card, you want to rip the battery out. I mean, in theory, like, I feel like that's a little safer, but I'd still say like that whole piece should go into a box that's safe, that, is a fireproof box that's made for it, and then is segregated into a different area, that if it does start a fire, it's not going to cause a fire anywhere else. So, I know that barely answered the question, but, I think there's so many different points that, where if you're at your house, you're supposed to take batteries and you're supposed to tape them and then put them into and segregate them and then bring them to an area that they can be segregated at the local, recycling center or your drop off, or, Home Depot or Lowe's or places like that. But again, there's just, there is a danger, right? I mean, people are on airplanes and they're seeing fires in lithium ion batteries, right, on airplanes. They haven't proven any that I know of that, have taken down an airplane, but it's, if you treat one of these in the wrong way, you can have a reaction. And when that happens, right, it's like, so to really answer your question, it's yes, you should take those materials away from the public if you can, because it's better for you to take them in a drop-off location than for them to drop it into a waste or recycling container. But then with that being said, you need to make sure that you guys don't get in the business of electronic recycling, because it's a danger to you if, you take a pliers and you're trying to pull a non-removable battery out of electronics. So now, again, you end up with not a bunch of small things, right? Yeah, you might have a bunch of Juul cigarettes, but you also might have a bunch of toys that, have non-removable batteries too. So, it definitely is something that you should create processes and make sure you're following best practices. Now, whether that's me or not, I mean, to me, it's by segregating it and ensuring that it's not around other material. And if it's a big enough operation, then to have something, in place like our system that can provide. But like, 'cause, I mean, you want to be able to soak it is really the idea, especially if it's by itself. Does that answer the question?
Yes, thank you. So looks like we're just about out of time, Ryan. So we're going to wrap it up. And so we're, again, this webinar, like all the webinars in this series, has been recorded, will be made available via YouTube links on both the National Recycling Coalition and Recycling Market Center websites. Thanks again for joining us, everybody. And Ryan, thanks for the great presentation. The videos really, brought it home, with this, what happens at these facilities and how it can be dealt with and prevented. So we hope you'll join us for next month's webinar, and please visit the NRC and RMC websites for schedule updates. And we'll leave that that contact information up for a little bit for Ryan before we sign off here. So thanks again, and have a great day, everybody.
Thanks, guys.